Hello everyone, you are listening to the Genealogist Journal podcast. Twice a week, we take a deep look into the interconnecting roots of history and genealogy. I am your host, historian and genealogist Jenny Finson. Hello, and welcome to the show. Today we are going to investigate a possible murder of one Rachel McIntyre. Rachel was a woman of mystery. Born in Ohio, her parents are unknown, but her siblings were never far away. As with any life, Rachel's was filled with twists and turns that led her down a shocking and yet fateful path. One day, Rachel just disappeared. When asked, her daughter stated that her mother had died, but she did not elaborate. But a local preacher, out of concern for his parishioners, alleged that Rachel had been murdered. Are these allegations of murder true? That is what we are going to investigate in the next 3 episodes. Now, without further ado, let's get started. In the summer of 1881 in Smith Center, Kansas, a man by the name of George Barrett was on trial for adultery involving 4 girls, all underage. One of the girls was his stepdaughter, Lydia, who was 15 at the time and pregnant. Where was the mother, Rachel McIntyre? During the trial, the local preacher made other allegations towards George Barrett. The preacher testified that earlier that year, in the summer of 1881, George's wife Rachel had been thrown down a well on their property. In other words, the preacher believed that George Barrett murdered his wife in cold blood so that he could be with his young stepdaughter, Lydia. If the preacher's allegations were true, how did Rachel end up at the bottom of a well? Did Lydia take part in her mother's death? Did Rachel find out about the affair between her daughter and her husband? Records in the state of Kansas are as such that we may never know all the circumstances surrounding Rachel McIntyre's death and possibly murder. However, like any good detective, we must start at the beginning. As genealogists know, there are several ways to track a person's life. There are census records, birth and death records, marriage records, wills and probates. The list goes on and on. To track Rachel McIntyre's movements through life, I mostly relied on census and marriage records. According to census records, Rachel was born about 1827, give or take, in Ohio. There is no birth record for her, as it wasn't until 1867 that the state of Ohio required by law for counties to record births in their area. The first record that mentions Rachel is her marriage record to Andrew J. Vance. The couple was married in Mercer County, Illinois on October 31st, 1844, Halloween. Mercer County is located in the northwestern part of the state, bordering on Iowa. I found record of their marriage in the Illinois State Marriage Index. It should be noted that Illinois did not start recording marriage records statewide until 1856, and Andrew and Rachel married in 1844. However, some counties were officially recording marriages earlier. Mercer County marriage records go back to 1816. Images of the original records are not digitized, nor online. There is an index available. You must contact individual counties for copies for original records. So anyway, Rachel McIntyre and Andrew J. Vance were married on Halloween, 1844. Rachel was about 17 years old and Andrew was 21. Within a year, their first son, Joshua A. Vance, was born. He was born on September 18, 1845 in Mercer County. Sometime between the fall of 1845 and the spring of 1850, the young Vance family moved about 150 miles west into Iowa, Salt Creek in Davis County. It is unclear why exactly they moved. On May 3rd, 1850, a second son was born, James William Vance. James was probably born in Salt Creek, Iowa. The reason why is that on August 24th, 1850, just 3 months after James was born, the family was recorded in the 1850 United States Federal Census in Salt Creek. Now, what is interesting about this 1850 census is not where the Vance family was living, but who was listed living with them. In dwelling number 111, Andrew Vance was listed as 27 years old, born in Virginia, working as a farmer. His wife Rachel was 22 years old, born in Ohio. Their son Joshua was 4, born in Illinois. James, the baby, was just 3 months old, born in Iowa. And finally, there was listed a Barbara McIntyre, who was 13 years old and born in Ohio, just like Rachel. Since it is the 1850 census, no relationship to the head of the household is listed. This can be frustrating at times when trying to prove how people are related to each other. Relationships in the U.S. federal census records did not appear until 1880. However, we can hypothesize that given her age, 13, which would make Barbara about 9 years younger than Rachel, and given that both Rachel and Barbara were born in Ohio, we can hypothesize that Barbara quite possibly is Rachel's younger sister. We can also put out there that Rachel's father and possibly mother had passed away sometime before the 1850 U.S. federal census, giving a good reason for Barbara, at 13 years old, to be living with an older possible sibling or other relative. After 1850, Rachel McIntyre Vance's life gets a little more interesting. So, her husband, Andrew Vance, was the brother of Gershom Vance. There is a Gershom Vance biography in the book Past and Present of Jasper County, Iowa, written by General James B. Weaver. In Gershom's biography, his brother Andrew is mentioned. I'm going to read the paragraph that talks about Andrew. Okay, here we go. When the Vance family came west, they built a log house 24 feet long and 16 feet wide, with a partition across the middle. And here the family lived for a good many years with John Venanta, who lived with William Vance. Let me stop here and interject a note. William Vance was the father of Andrew and Gershom. John Venanta was Andrew and Gershom's uncle on their mother's side. Okay, continuing on. John Venanta, who with William Vance carried on trade with the Indians, trading beads for valuable furs, etc. They also had a woodyard, and part of the time worked on one side of the Great Mississippi and part of the time on the other. They had built a temporary shack on the Illinois side of the river for shelter, and here it was being detained longer than they had reckoned on that Gershom, the subject of our sketch, was born on November 4th, 1836, at what is now Andalusia, Rock Island County, Illinois. And being a stranger in a strange land, they called him Gershom. He was the 7th child in the order of birth, those who preceded him being as followed. Andrew, who lived and farmed in Mercer County, Illinois, and died there in his 80th year, was born in 1820. In 1851, he went to California to seek for gold, going overland by teams. Being well impressed with the country, he remained there until 1871, when he returned to Mercer County, Illinois. The biography goes on from there, but what is important to our story is that Andrew Vance up and left his family. What is more, Rachel was probably pregnant with her 3rd son, Andrew Jackson Vance. He was born sometime in 1852 in Iowa. Let me interject, if you would like to read the entire biography of Gershom Vance, visit our website at genealogistjournal.com. I have posted it on the blog. Okay, so I tried to verify that Andrew Vance did indeed go to California to mine for gold. In the 1860 census, the U.S. federal census, there is an Andrew Vance that does seem a likely candidate. This Andrew Vance is listed as living with 2 other men, a Jacob Peters and a Jonathan Beaumont. They are working as miners in Kimshrew, Butte County, California. The Andrew Vance listed was said to be 44 years old, which places his birthday around 1816 and born in Pennsylvania instead of Virginia. Although, in Gershom Vance's biography, the family is said to have migrated to the northern Mississippi River area of Illinois from Allegheny County in Pennsylvania. So Grisham's biography lends credence to Andrew Vance actually being born in Pennsylvania rather than in Virginia. So to make all of that information a little more concise for you, in the 1850 U.S. federal census, Andrew Vance's birthplace was listed as Virginia. And in the 1860 census, in California, Vance's birthplace is listed as Pennsylvania. It is very likely that the Andrew Vance listed in the 1860 census in Butte County, California, working as a miner, is Rachel McIntyre's husband and Gershom Vance's brother from the biography. Remember, Andrew Vance didn't come back to Illinois until 1871. In the 1880 federal census, Andrew Vance is back in Mercer County. He was listed as 60 years old. His birthplace, weirdly enough, was listed as Indiana. He was working as a wood chopper. Living right next door was his son, Andrew J. Vance Jr. He also was working as a wood chopper. Andrew Jr. was married with 3 daughters. Neither father nor son could read or write. The Gershom biography states that Andrew Vance died in Mercer County, Illinois, when he was 80 years old. That would place his death around 1900. There was an Andy Vance in the 1900 U.S. federal census who was listed as a widowed boarder in Mercer County, Illinois. He was listed as 81 years old, born in Pennsylvania. Now, getting back to Rachel, I have to say that would have been a horrible and humiliating situation to find yourself in 1851. Abandoned by your husband for dreams of gold with 2 small children and 1 on the way. The next mention of Rachel McIntyre is in the 1856 Iowa state census. What I love about state censuses is they occur often in 5 or 10-year cycles and land on different years than the U.S. federal census. It makes it much easier to track family movements. Anyway, Rachel was listed in the 1856 Iowa state census as living in Perry, Davis County, Iowa, with a Samuel McIntyre, age 26, and his family, Dr. Stuart McIntyre, no age listed, an Alexander McIntyre, age 27, in the household listed previously, a William McIntyre, age 37, was listed with his family. All the men listed above were born in Ohio. So in the 1856 state census, Rachel had only 1 son with her, James. Her eldest, Joshua, and her youngest, Andrew, are listed with a different family as J. Vance, 11 years old, and A. Vance, 4 years old. Also, possible sister Barbara McIntyre was not listed with the McIntyre family. She might have already been married and living nearby. So for at least a little while, Rachel was living with what could very well possibly be her brothers. I do not know how long she may have lived with them, but 4 years later, in the 1860 U.S. federal census, Rachel was back in Mercer County, Illinois, near Keithsburg, which is located in southern Mercer County, right along the Mississippi River. Rachel was recorded as 38 years old, making her birth year about 1822 versus 1827 from the previous 2 censuses, born in Illinois versus Ohio. Rachel was working in the Michael Halstead house as a domestic servant, with her youngest, Andrew. Her other 2 boys, Joshua, was living with his uncle Gershom Vance in Mercer County, working for the William Kiddo family. I don't know where Rachel's other son, James, was living. It was not long until Rachel caught the eyes and heart of one of her employer's sons. Daniel C. Halstead was a tall man, reaching 6 foot 2 inches tall, with black hair and hazel eyes. He was about the age of 35 when the 2 met. He fell head over heels in love with Rachel. They were married on January 3rd, 1861, in Mercer County. Their marriage is listed in the Illinois Marriage Index. 4 months after they were married, the American Civil War broke out. Daniel joined the Union Army a year later. He signed up in Keithsburg, Illinois, on August 2nd, 1862. He mustered in a month later on September 2nd, 1862. As Daniel marched towards Knoxville, Tennessee with his unit, the 102 Illinois U.S. Infantry, did he know that his wife Rachel was already 3 months pregnant with their first child? Michael Zebedee Halstead was born March 17, 1863. Even though Daniel had signed up for 3 years of service, he was discharged on January 13, 1863. For what reason, I don't know. I would have to pay to get his service and pensions records. At some point I will. I do know that Daniel did submit pension papers on July 10, 1869. I just haven't seen the contents of those papers. On April 23, 1865, Daniel and Rachel had a second child, a girl named Lydia Melvina Halstead. A year later, in 1866, Rosa A Halstead came along. 3 years later, in 1870, the family was living in Millersburg in Mercer County. Daniel was working as a farmer. He was said to be 44 years old, born in Pennsylvania. Rachel was listed as 42 years old. Also listed in the household was Michael, 8, Lydia, 5, Rosa, 3, James William Vance, 20, and Andrew J. Vance, 18. James and Andrew were helping as laborers on the farm. The family seemed to be thriving. It was all going well. Rachel, after being abandoned by her first husband, Andrew, seemed to be well established within the community and had a stable home with Daniel. Even children from her previous marriage were living with them. Rachel and Daniel seemed content, at least on paper. It is hard to explain what happened next. Like a whirlwind, hitting town, upsetting everything. What happened will shock and amaze you. I must admit, it was crazy. So we are far from being done with this story. So join us next time to hear about the astonishing decisions that led up to Rachel's possible murder. If you liked what you heard here today, subscribe to our podcast on Spotify to hear all of our episodes. Also, check out our website at genealogistjournal.com. Join our community for access to more content, genealogical tips, and dynamic genealogy